It is the holiday season, and that means two things are going on. One, there are a ton of Christmas movies to watch, and two, everyone is going to argue with their family. And so I'm here to help you settle the ultimate debate. Which generation's Christmas movie reigns supreme? Let's get into it. Hollywood is like every other big business in that when it sees holidays, it sees dollar signs. Yes! Which means that when this time of year comes around, the opportunity to make a movie that everyone in the family can see together is just too good to pass up. And I think of the Christmas or holiday movie a lot like I think of the Christmas dinner. It has to be a meal that satisfies all the needs. That's what we call a 4-quadrant movie.
A 4-quadrant movie is a film designed to appeal to all major audience groups: males, females, viewers under and over 25, by blending universal themes, humor, action, and emotional resonance. Some examples of 4-quadrant movies include The Lion King, Harry Potter, and Jurassic Park.
So your Christmas or holiday movie has to have a lot of different elements on the plate that all work. Something sweet, something fun, something a little bit more dense and plot-driven maybe, something that's just your main course, maybe something savory, but you're also gonna need something like the greens, something healthy. And that's the secret ingredient. We're gonna just call it messaging. Because every holiday movie, to truly work, has to get into the idea of messages about the spirit of the season. Maybe it's about faith, maybe it's about family, maybe it's about both of those things. What's the anchor point? What's the thing that holds this movie and this family together that makes them feel the need to watch it again at this pivotal time of year? So let's talk about the big Christmas movies, the go-to ones that everybody comes to year after year, and then let's bring them up against each other in a battle of generations. Up first in our Christmas dinner buffet is Elf from Gen Z. Elf is excellent. Let's just make no bones about it. It's hilarious. The concept is really, really strong. You have something so original, the idea of a grown man raised as an elf in Santa's village who has to go home to New York and connect with his actual human parent. And the casting is so much of what does the work here. Will Ferrell is absolutely excellent and hilarious, and he's playing off James Caan. James Caan's performance as the angry, grouchy dad who doesn't want anything to do with him and is kind of like this anti-spirit of Christmas figure is just perfect. It's where the comedy works. This is a perfect example of where ingredients clash a little bit. Those moments between Caan and Ferrell, when they're at each other or back and forth, are the moments that truly make the drama and the comedy play. When you don't have that contrast, the comedy just becomes too much sweet. It becomes a sweetness overload, kind of like the stuff that Elf eats. But let's talk about the messaging. This is where Elf and the Gen Z generation maybe slip a little bit, because Elf does have powerful messaging about family and coming together at this time of year, and James Caan kind of finding his youth or joy again through Will Ferrell. It's all there. It's just a little bit stumbly in how it gets there. That final sequence where everybody comes together and is singing feels like it got forced to that point. And there's also, I have to mention, a super weird scene in the middle of Elf. For some reason, when they're working in the department store, Zooey Deschanel's character is showering there and singing, which is already kind of weird. Like, do employees shower at the department stores? But then Will Ferrell wanders in there and starts singing with her, and it's very innocent, but it's also very weird, and it just never plays right. But that aside, the messaging in Elf is just a little bit of a stumbling block. It works a little hard to shoehorn it into what is otherwise just an excellent comedy. It's just not as smooth and natural as it has to be effortless. That said, Elf wins year after year. Tons of people watch it. Gen Z is satisfied, and honestly, so is every other generation.
I made my family disappear.
Yeah! Up next, we have Home Alone, the millennials' entry into the Christmas movie battle royale. The thing about Home Alone is it is also leaning hard into the comedy, which really works. And we haven't seen it as much in recent years in movies, but comedies tend to connect with the whole family. Everybody's smiling and laughing. Everybody's having a good time. And as long as you can stay appropriate, it works. And this is where Home Alone has something that very few movies have ever pulled off. It really goes after violence in a comedic, Looney Tunes style way without ever losing a groundedness in character and meaning. Let me tell you what I'm talking about. But where Daniel Stern, who plays one of the bank robbers trying to get into the house, gets electrocuted. There are frames that people freeze and love to meme all over the internet where it's actually just a skeleton in a wig with a beard that looks like Daniel Stern. This is just classic cartoon comedy, but with human beings. And people love that because it takes the edge off of the violence and it allows it to be goofy and fun for everyone. It's just not that serious. Another scene that is brilliantly comedic in Home Alone that everybody talks about in quotes year after year is the "you filthy animals" scene.
Keep the change, you filthy animal.
Where there's Macaulay Culkin sitting inside watching a movie that adults should watch where there's violence and there's a guy shooting and there's a guy delivering food outside who thinks something's going on, it's directed at him. This is a classic scene that plays out dramatic tension, which is where something's happening that the audience understands, but some of the characters in the scene don't. That creates a dissonance, which is where the laughter comes in. Comedy is a science. It's not just an art. And this is a perfect example of absolutely crushing the formula. So what about Home Alone's messaging? Home Alone's messaging is in the plot from the beginning. Kevin is overlooked. This is a big family and people don't pay attention to him and he's easily forgotten. So easily forgotten, they leave him, yes, home alone. So that's why Kevin being overlooked becomes a theme. How many people feel at Christmas, kids, parents alike, a little overlooked, a little bit like an afterthought, maybe a little bit like it's not about them or they wish that they had something more from their family or just something's not quite right. That feeling turns out is somewhat universal. And they've taken that feeling and they've put it in an actual plot where it actually happens. And Kevin proves his value to the family by literally defending the house from intruders. That's all part of the actual plot. So the messaging, the greens, the healthy stuff is woven into the fabric of what's fun and funny about the movie. That's the kind of genius that's really hard to compete with. Now, I'm not a millennial, not taking sides yet. I'm just saying that's a pretty strong case for Home Alone.
Yippee-ki-yay, mother.
Up next, we have Gen X's entry into the fray, Die Hard. We have already established, yes, Die Hard is a Christmas movie. But it's not just because people watch it at Christmas time. And it's not just because it takes place at Christmas. I'll get to why it's actually a Christmas movie later. But right now, let's talk about Die Hard in general. Die Hard sets up a plot where a tough NYPD cop has to fly all the way to the coast in LA for Christmas, which already feels all kinds of off. It's a fish out of water thing, but it's also like his plane landing, it's palm trees, it's sunny, it's not Christmas, right? And it's also not appropriate to this guy. His family is fractured. We've set up immediately this perfect conflict, right? He even gets off the plane and groans about Los Angeles and its vibes, which are immediately apparent to him and not his style at all. The thing is, he shows up to his wife's Christmas party. There's a hostile takeover from one of the great movie villains of all time in Hans Gruber, played amazingly well by Alan Rickman in, I think, his feature film debut. Isn't that incredible? He just came out the gate with one of the best, most memorable performances of like the half century. John McClane, Hans Gruber, going head to head over his wife, who's changed her last name, Holly Gennaro. This is one more way in which we've been shown that the family has fractured. And this is why Die Hard is a Christmas movie. Because the family falling apart and being brought together is almost always core to a Christmas movie's secret ingredient. Why is that? Well, because the people watching it are usually a family, right? And making a good 4-quadrant movie means appealing to the whole family. Why? Because who's going to see the movie all together at Christmas time? Who's gathered for the only time maybe all year? A family. Uh-oh, a terrorist has taken over the building, and now John is uniquely equipped to crawl through the vents.
Come out to the coast. We'll get together, have a few laughs.
And save the day, win back the patriarchy, establish dominance, all of which is where the messaging in Die Hard, by the way, gets a little antiquated. Like, if you want to go there, if we want to talk about all that, and we don't have to, that doesn't have to be this video, Die Hard still does it all effectively. It's, after all, just a plot, just a story. We don't have to read all that into it. We can just say, she's Holly McClane at the end of that movie because he saved her life, he saved Christmas, he brought the family back together. And that's always what's happening in these Christmas movies. Now, does Die Hard do this better than the other movies? Debatable. There's a lot of fighting in Die Hard. There's a lot of swearing, some of the most memorable swearing of all time. Overquoted, maybe not even quoted enough. The question remains, though, is it the best?
You see, George, you really had a wonderful life.
Final entry into the battle of the Christmas movies is It's a Wonderful Life. All right, It's a Wonderful Life was actually not made by boomers, but we're calling it the boomer movie because it's the one they grew up with. It was literally on TV every Christmas. Now, It's a Wonderful Life was not a big hit when it came out originally in the 1940s, directed by incredibly talented filmmaker, prolific filmmaker, winner of Oscars, etc., Frank Capra. This was not one of his most successful movies. It was seen as a little bit corny at the time that it came out. But over time, they kept replaying it on TV every Christmas. Yes, back then that's how these things worked. And it became, for multiple generations, the Christmas movie. It's a Wonderful Life is light on the comedy. It's really not comedically motivated like some of the others. This man, George Bailey, lives in a small town, and we go through his whole life in little snippets, and we see his hopes, his dreams, his goals, his family, his responsibilities, how he falls in love, becomes a man, becomes a father, and ultimately ends up having to protect the small, beautiful, idyllic town of Bedford Falls from another great cinema villain, Mr. Potter. And he wants to turn Bedford Falls into Pottersville. So that's the battle at the core of the story. And George Bailey, spoiler alert, ends up wanting to commit suicide because he loses all his money in a bank error. This is pretty heavy stuff. This is pretty high stakes, serious stuff. And the movie has more to do with faith than any of the others, which is fitting because it's a little old fashioned. And in this movie, it is again about a family that starts to come apart and a town that is threatened to come apart. But the values, the old fashioned American values of a small town, save this concept, this man, this family, and this Christmas. It is as powerful a movie as there is if you really sink your teeth into it. However, it lacks so much of the stuff that the other movies have that would connect to audiences today. First of all, it's 4:3, it's black and white. These are, unfortunately, big obstacles to the modern audience. I think in some ways, it is the most true to form, because all these other guys who made these other movies, and girls, were probably closer to a boomer generation than a millennial or a Gen X or any other. And that's why It's a Wonderful Life informed their ideas, I believe, of what a Christmas movie should be. And they evolved that concept, and they brought some more flavors to it, which maybe brought us to something that's a little more palatable to younger modern audiences. But you can't ever undo what It's a Wonderful Life does for the genre. It really establishes the idea that there's messaging and power behind a movie that brings people together at Christmas time and reminds them of what we can be at our best.
Don't you see what a mistake it would be to throw it away?
So who wins the Christmas Battle Royale? We have laid out 4 great Christmas movies that you should watch every Christmas if you're doing that, because they're all really good. They're really, really good. There's no loser here. But just for the sake of argument, so you can go home and tell everybody which one's the best, it's hard not to come down with Home Alone. I think Home Alone wins because it has strong messaging. Everybody can still watch it. It's not heavy-handed with its messaging at all. The kids will absolutely love it. Everybody's gonna laugh. There's no barrier to entry. It's modern enough. And it's just fun. And yes, the messaging is light. It's not as serious as something like It's a Wonderful Life. It's not as adult themed as something like Die Hard. And it's maybe not as silly as something like Elf. But it does all the things the others do in a balanced way that everyone can enjoy stress-free. So if you're actually looking to avoid the arguments this year, just suggest Home Alone. Let us know in the comments which ones you like the most, which ones I'm right about, which ones I'm wrong about, what's the best holiday movie that has nothing to do with Christmas, because I'd love to hear takes on that. And thank you all for watching. Be sure to like, rate, and subscribe, and check out more of our videos.